My father had one job in his life. I'll have 6 jobs in mine. My children will have 6 jobs at the same time. Now, these words by Robin Chase really struck me because I was wondering about what would happen to my kids when they face the future of work, when they are in the workplace and they have to think about, what am I going to do? Now, this is my daughter doing her second job. At age 2, she was a fashion model for a clothing store. Now, there's a second job because you know her first job, to be a kid. So let's skip a few years ahead, and here's my daughter now with 3 jobs. First job still the same, be a kid. Second job is actually still the same. She's being a fashion model for that skirt that my wife made. And third job is actually a new skill she learned, which was making the quilt. So the quilt that you see behind her, she picked out the patterns, she laid it all out, she sewed the squares themselves, and she finally outsourced the last bit, which is putting the whole thing together. Went to my wife. Now, she was picking up more and more skills as she was going along. And we have these many skills that we learn as we grow up. But as we go along and we get older and we get educated, we are told to cut it down to one job. So we are specializing into something that will be our career. This view of having one job, having one way of what are we going to do, and thinking of that and framing our lives in that is actually really limiting. People ask me, what do I do? So I do a number of different things. I help people think and connect them to ideas of new ways to work. That's my first job. It's my primary job. That's what I do probably 80% of the time. Another 10% of the time, I write. And this is probably the most visible, like Richie said. I've been in many different things, written in many different places, about 7 books or so. And the third thing is I teach. So I'm also a martial art instructor. I teach sword fighting to middle school and high school kids. And each one of these things are a different outlet for myself. So when someone asks me, what do I do? And I try to tell them everything. And they go like, no, I just want to know your job. It's like, well, I have a title on a card, yes. I can give that title to you and I can tell you what that is. But what I really do is all of these things. They give me meaning in different ways. And that idea of specialization, which is keeping me to that one job, is keeping me away from the idea that I work at multiple things. It's very different than what my father did when he's a doctor. I mean, he was retired now, but he's been a doctor all his life, and he really had just 2 jobs. All the way up until retirement, just 2 jobs. So I think of myself as much more dynamic than that. And this is something that we might have to face as we go along. Because the idea of working in multiple places and in multiple things that you like to do may be something we have to do. This is a chart by Rawn Shah, who spoke at TEDxBCG last year. And he was describing a future where we will actually have talent shortages in all the major economies at the same time. Now, this is projection including, Boston Consulting Group did the paper on this, and they looked at all the dynamics. They looked at demographics, they looked at new inventions, innovation, they looked at robots, they looked at changes to what we consider work now, automation, all of that, and they still came up with this. So the proposition there was that we have so many people, and yet we still cannot fill the work. If we were to keep our economies growing, if we don't want them all to tank at the same time, sticking us into a global recession that we don't know when we'll get out of, we need to find new ways to open up how we work, and possibly working in multiple things at the same time. Now, when I talk about multi-work, this really strikes people in a strange way, because they imagine something like this. This is your captain speaking. I'm also your baggage handler, your ticket agent, your head steward, your navigator, your towel boy, your flight chiropractor, and your co-pilot. This is my daughter. She's your flight attendant, your travel guide, your car reservation specialist. She'll take care of you on the flight, but hey, what are you doing, daughter? Oh, this is from a skit that I saw in Living Color in the 90s. She turns to the passenger next to her, and she says, "This man from Trinidad, Dad, he's got 15 jobs. I think I love he." So that capacity of, working in 15 jobs, I don't think that's a real, I'm probably not going to be enjoying myself if I had that many things to think about. But I do think it's possible to work in multiple things at the same time. So there's a reality out there, and we have to find new ways of how do we make that possible for each other. So we have to think of how do we make the situation of working for multiple things palpable for everyone. Not just people who are very dynamic and outgoing, gregarious, but really for anyone. So this is something I came across when I was on a trip. And I went out to Amsterdam, and I stayed at an Airbnb, much nicer than a hotel. I was staying there, I was enjoying this place, and I turned to my host and says, "So what do you do?" I was expecting him to say, "I go to school, and I do host my room and in spare time." But he says, "Well, actually, I host my room. I've been doing that for a while. I am an interior designer and actually have products that I market and import from other places. So like the board that you see in the corner, things like that. So I have a store where I sell interior goods. It's both online as well as a real physical store down the street. And then my final job is I'm an architect." So he does all three of those things. He doesn't think of them as separate. There's a passive element. He rents out his room. There's an active element. He is an architect. He works on designs and such. There's a semi-passive, semi-active thing, which is the store. It kind of runs itself. And behind all of that are platforms. So there's a platform for Airbnb where he's hosting this. It makes his way of finding people and customers so much easier. It makes it simpler for people to understand what to expect, how to pay, directions, all of the logistics is involved in something like that. He has a platform for his store. It's an online store as well as a physical store, but it's got all his inventory out there. He knows what's going on. He knows the orders. So the platforms really support him in a different way. It makes it possible for him to do a whole lot more than he would by himself. So these platforms are really available to everyone, and they are simplifying how we connect to work. There are platforms for everything. You've probably heard of Uber, all the car sharing ones like Sidecar, Lyft, Uber, they're all out there. There is Odesk, TaskRabbit. There are actually dozens and dozens of these, and we will see hundreds more appear because it seems to be a huge potential market. And what we're looking at is new ways where people are finding it a structured way of doing a particular type of work. And they have choices, many different platforms. Each person using another new platform becomes difficult. It's the same thing as, hey, I have a Mac, I have a PC, I have an Android, I have an iPhone. You don't really want to learn more and more platforms as you go along. But when you use these platforms, what you're really putting in there is some of your information about yourself. Now, this is information about what's available, your skills, your resources, your expertise. So what you actually end up in there is the data about your capabilities. What can you work at? Where can you work? When are you available? So all of these are really in your resume that we think of today, except when you look at resumes, well, actually nobody really looks at resumes anymore. They have software that looks at resumes for these data points. That's all they're good for. Really, you can spend all the time shaping all of that. All you really need to know is how to shape the data so it will be seen. If we could automate that and we could make it easy to find each other, then that becomes much more of our ability to find and place ourselves in different parts of work. But that becomes a lot more because you see, we ourselves are that next platform. The things that we do, rather than use somebody else's platform one time and then a different one and yet another one, we can be the platform. Why don't we provide information about ourselves? We have the schedule that we want the master copy of and make sure everybody else has their little segment of that. So this is an opportunity out there for the technologists of the world. But really, for me, I want to know how I can do this and what does it actually give me. So as opposed to being overworked, as in the captain in the early situation, what I am looking at is more freedom. So multi-work, the possibility of working in all these places at the same time, actually gives me more choice. Gives me a choice of what I want to do. It frees me from the idea that there's only one thing I can do. I have to think about it all the time. I can't really shift my head away from it. And you know, shifting your mind from that one piece of work really does open up your creativity. It makes you a lot less stress, gives you a lot more choices. And more so, what it really does for me is it helps me find meaning. So myself as a sword teacher has very little to do with myself as a writer. But I've learned over the years that a sword teacher has philosophies that they teach students. And those ideas of how do you engage other people, how do you interact, what do you see coming, what don't you see coming, that really does come back in my stories. And the same thing with the future of work and the areas that I look in that space. The meaning that I get from each one of those things is different, and I can apply them in different ways. So that's what gives me creativity. That's what allows me to be innovative. So I find my meaning because I have that choice of different things I can do. When someone asks you, what do you do? How do you describe it? Do you give them first your job title, your company that you work at? Do you describe the general area, you know, in case it's a completely new field or industry that they're not familiar with? You know, let's start with something simple. Start with thinking about 3 things that you do, like to do, or want to do. And these are, think of them as a possibility for an entire field, an entire job by itself. Each of these things start defining what was possible for us. A next step would be something much simpler, just become a consumer of these. Now, when you use some of these services, you get comfortable with, is this a real thing? What quality do I expect with something like that? When that becomes comfortable, then you can even consider, maybe I should offer myself in that. Is there something I can do? Whether it is, I can drive a car, or I can be a mentor, or I can be a teacher. Any of those things. Yeah, there's just different capabilities, and it's open for anyone in the economy. So think of the 3 things that define who you are and give you meaning. And that is the setting for the future of finding your work for yourself. Thank you.